Now, our top story today, according to the Transparency International, Zimbabwe is losing $1 billion every year because of corruption. And the report has fingered the Zimbabwe Republic Police and the local government officials as the worst offenders. Now, this is not news for Zimbabwe civil society movements like #ThisFlag and #Tajamuka, who have blamed the social and economic issues of the Southern African nation on the Mugabe regime's mismanagement of the country. And the group say police roadblocks are often just opportunities for police to try and extort money from motorists. Now, in August this year, the country was gripped by violent protests and by residents that say they are tired of police corruption. Transparency International Zimbabwe say police, the local councils, the Vehicle Inspection Department and the Education Department were among the most corrupt institutions. Now, the report says, and I quote, "The resulting institutionalization and systematization of corruption in Zimbabwean political and economic spheres has been extensive. It would be surprising if the value of corruption were less than $1 billion annually." This report comes at a time when the country is preparing for the general elections in 2018. It also coincides with low approval ratings for Zimbabwe's aging president, who turns 92 this year. Critics are blaming President Mugabe for failing to contain the rampant corruption. The situation is hurting the country's attraction to outside investors, and to make matters worse, police are doing nothing to arrest the perpetrators, citing a lack of evidence. Now, joining me in studio to analyze this situation and to get their insight as well is Mr. Morlife Mapeture. He is the Deputy Secretary for Information and Publicity from Zanu-PF. In studio as well is Mr. Mtumwa Mawere. He is a businessman. Joining us on the phone line as well will be Audit. He's the spokesperson for MDC-T, and Jelas Mawarire, who is also the spokesperson for Zimbabwe People First. You at home, we do value your opinion. You can join in the conversation as well. We're not opening our phone lines today, but you can tweet us, and our Twitter handle is @ANN7TV, and I will be reading some of your tweets live on air today, so you can go ahead and share your views with us. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Mr. Mawadire, Mr. Mapetres, we've had you on the show before. You know some of the issues that we have touched on, based on Zimbabwe. Now, with this report coming along, how much of it do you think is based on research and actual facts, or rather just opinion and conjecture? I'll start with you, Mr. Mapetres.
Thank you, Audrey. I'm not so sure what this report is based on, or whether they have got enough evidence on the figures they are talking about, because it's so surprising that people will be talking of 1 billion through police roadblocks and.
I mean, Zimbabwe would have the richest police, at this point. I mean, if it's $1 billion that is going to the police. Mr. Mawere, you can join in the conversation. How much of this report do you think is actually, something that we can trust as facts?
I think there is a lot of hallucination in the marketplace, because most of these people you call Transparency International, one would expect them to be transparent. Imagine just the understanding of what corruption is and what it is not. And you look at the police of a country that is on its knees economically, and then you just happen to pluck a number, $1 billion. How is it broken down? Nobody knows. And corruption by nature is private. The policeman receives maybe $10. Who is got the camera? Who is counting? Then Transparency International automatically comes. Even the story itself, it's bizarre. It says if the number, it can't be less than $1 billion. For which economy, nobody knows.
Right.
And just imagine who is being targeted is the police. If you look at the experience of the last 36 years and the role of the state and the primitive accumulation, which you can call corruption, how does it occur physically? I go to a roadblock manufactured by the police, then to go the other side, I have to pay money. And then this occurs in 365 days. And the Transparency International, I don't know where the cameras are. I don't know where they are, whether it's science or fiction, whether it's targeted at producing a predetermined outcome. Because if it's a political lynching, then one would expect, even the story then puts President Mugabe as the person who allows this primitive accumulation to take place.
Right, and I must make it very clear to our viewers at home as well, and our guests, that we tried to get a hold of Transparency International Zimbabwe to get their comment, obviously, with regards to this report, but we didn't manage to get a response from them. Joining us on the phone line as well is Mr. Audit, who is the spokesperson for MDC-T. Mr. Gutu, thank you so much for joining us. He's on the phone line all the way from Harare in Zimbabwe. Mr. Gutu, your reactions to this report? Have you personally experienced any of this corruption that the Transparency report is talking about?
Thank you very much, Audrey, for the opportunity. Thank you, Africa, for listening and watching. In fact, I would actually want to say that the report by Transparency International Zimbabwe, to the fact that Zimbabwe is losing no less than $1 billion every year annually due to corruption, is, with respect, actually an understatement. From my own personal experience, particularly when I was Deputy Minister of Justice and Legal Affairs, from June 2010 up until the end of the inclusive government in July 2013, we were receiving on a daily basis no less than 25 reports of corruption just pertaining to the justice delivery sector in Zimbabwe. And some of the figures we got, and even the evidence that, from my own point of view as a practicing lawyer, the evidence was so concrete, the evidence was so convincing. And I then formed an opinion that this idea of saying we are losing $1 billion annually is actually an understatement. So the report, the analysis, the study from Transparency International Zimbabwe is actually spot on. I'm actually very surprised when a seasoned business person in the form of Mr. Mtuma Mawere actually says these figures are being plucked from nowhere. I believe that from his own experience as a business person in Zimbabwe, and even as an ordinary Zimbabwean citizen, he would appreciate and even know that corruption in Zimbabwe is endemic. And that corruption, particularly within the public sector, is so endemic that it is tearing the society apart. Corruption is there in Zimbabwe, in the public sector, in the private sector, in business, in sport, everywhere.
Mr. Gutu, I'll just interrupt you there. You say you agree with the report that over $1 billion, could have been lost due to corruption in Zimbabwe. But we do know that the country's GDP is less than $5 billion. How do we get to this figure? Is it not a bit of a gross exaggeration with regards to the numbers?
I don't even want to think it's a gross exaggeration, because Transparency International Zimbabwe is actually a very reputable anti-corruption body, which is represented in more than 197 countries. So this is not like we are dealing with a dubious or bogus anti-corruption organization. This is an organization which employs some of the most highly qualified anti-corruption personnel that you can find not only in Zimbabwe, but all over the world.
Mr. Gutu, please stay on the line. I want to give Mr. Mawere an opportunity to answer some of the remarks that you have made. Mr. Mawere?
You know, a pedestrian determination of corruption is also reckless. Because I can't say, because I read certain reports, that is corruption. Corruption is a legal construction. Here you have a state actor who receives money that he is not entitled to. There is a corrupter and a corrupted. Where is this source of 1 billion? It must exist somewhere. Then it must be transferred to the private hands. And Mr. Honorable Gutu, I think he's a respected lawyer. That's where we should leave it. And the presumption of innocence ought to be a fundamental tenet of the rule of law. We can't say because we want power, then everything else is broken down so that we use that as a bridge to nowhere. Let's be realistic. You have an economy that is limping. Then there is no investment coming in. All of a sudden you have a pot of gold to prove a point. That if I remove the people who are in government, then the pot of gold will be somewhere in public hands.
Right, and all these allegations, it's very important that there is evidence, because we have, let me bring into the conversation as well Mr. Jelas Moarire, who's the spokesperson for Zim People First. Mr. Moarire, thank you so much for joining us. I understand you have been listening to the comments that have been coming from some of my panelists. We do know that President Mugabe himself has admitted to corruption amongst his own cabinet ministers, but he says that there has been no evidence and therefore there hasn't been any prosecution. What are your thoughts?
Audrey, I would like to provide the evidence that the Zimbabwe economy can produce more than 4 billion in terms of the money that can be generated in this country. The president of the country has admitted that we have lost 15 billion over the 9 years that we have been mining diamonds in this country. And if you divide 15 billion by 9, you come to 1.6 billion every year that we have lost. That is in the diamond sector alone. But I would like to take you to an audit that was done scientifically by Ernst & Young. And that audit has revealed that we have 13,782 people that are unemployed, that are employed in the civil service and are not rendering any service to the government. And this, if you assume that they earn $400 every month, the 13,782 will go 5.5 million per month, and that translates to 66.2 million per annum. And over and above that, we have 6,861 civil servants who were employed on one day, on the 26th of May 2008, and this is according to a scientific audit that was done by Ernst & Young. And these ones alone, they go for about 39.9 million per annum. And that same report also acknowledges that we have 75,273 civil servants without the requisite minimum qualifications for the jobs that they are employed to do. And these, if you make your calculations, they are gobbling 361 million per year. If you do your simple arithmetic, that gives you $467 million per annum that is spent on people who are not supposed to be civil servants. And that's corruption. They've been corruptly employed, and they go for 461.1 million. If you add 467 million plus 1.6 million from the diamonds, you get up to 2 billion.
Mr. Moarire, I'm sorry, I will have to interrupt you there. You have our heads spinning here in studio with all those numbers that you're throwing, but we certainly appreciate that. Obviously, you have done your research. Mr. Mapetero, I see you are itching to respond to something here. Apparently, corruption is evident, but nobody seems to want to come and bring the evidence.
Yeah. I'm happy. I heard a level-headed legislator and a well-respected lawyer, Honorable Gutu, talking about the evidence he received while he was in office as the Deputy Minister of Justice. With all that evidence, what did they do? Because right now, everyone is actually saying there is no evidence of those corrupt tendencies which are being reported on a daily basis. But he is talking of concrete evidence which he had while he was in the office. What did he do with that evidence?
Mr. Gutu, I hope you're still on the line with us. Well, we seem to have lost Mr. Audit. Mr. Gutu, are you with us?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Great. Mr. Mapetero is alluding to the fact that you had spoken of all the evidence that you received while you were in the Justice Office. What did you do with all this evidence? Because that has been one of the major issues that Zimbabwe seems to be facing when it comes to corruption, that there is no evidence.
The evidence we have, in fact, one of my specific duties as Deputy Minister was actually to run what we had created as the anti-corruption unit within the Ministry of Justice. And this was targeting the justice delivery sector throughout the length and breadth of Zimbabwe. We were receiving reports about corruption at the Magistrates Court, corruption at the High Court, corruption in the prison and correctional services sector. So everything that we were receiving, we were documenting. And the good thing about the work that we did is that we put everything in black and white. I prepared reports, which I gave to my minister. My minister then was Honorable Patrick Chinamasa, who, as you know, according to the Zimbabwean system, a deputy minister doesn't sit in cabinet. So I didn't sit in cabinet. I had no opportunity to present these reports in cabinet. All I had to do was to hand them over to my immediate political boss within the ministry, who was Minister Chinamasa. And I would like to believe that he should have been able to present the reports that I gave him, voluminous reports with evidence, what and all, to cabinet. If he didn't, then that's not my problem. But the good thing is I still have copies. Obviously, for reasons of confidentiality, I can't come on air and start mentioning names of people. But corruption is rampant. And as my colleague and comrade Jelas Mawari has said, President Mugabe himself, not too long ago, was on public record saying that no less than 15 billion US dollars worth of diamonds money has been lost in Zimbabwe. And it was him, he's the president, he's the chief executive of the country. And you cannot therefore say he was saying something that was totally out of the blue.
Right, Mr. Gutu, I'll ask you to hold on to your thoughts. I want Mr. Mawere to respond to that. Where does the buck stop? Because it appears everyone is saying, I've done my part, but who's responsible for prosecutions?
No, I'm just surprised that this anecdotal, this arithmetic approach to corruption is so tempting, so sexy. It produces a lot of words, but the reality of the problem is very clear. The deputy minister, he was in government. We brought to him even about SMM. This is real corruption. They don't talk about it. They would rather listen to Transparency International because it presents a trajectory that suits their own voices. Some of the people in Zimbabwe first were in government for a long time. One would expect them to have a pot of gold somewhere. Because if it is a club of thieves, why would it leave out the people who now say we are first? And the MDC was in government. And all this money was circulating, preparing reports. Where are these reports? If you say your minister killed the reports, at least the author is here. Give us the primary report so that we come to another program where we don't pontificate and wait for Transparency International to play football on Africans.
Well, Mr. Gutu has passed the buck on to his then boss, Minister Chinamasa.
That's
and
convenient.
He says, you know, he's
that's
the one who has to answer to
Let's
that.
get Chinamasa here and say, where is this report? Mr. Gutu, I think through you, must produce that report that he purports to have produced for his minister. And I also want to see a report on SMM. Where is it?
A lot of issues coming up, high-profile cases. Mr. Mawere, I understand you're still on the phone with us. When it comes to corruption, it seems there's this perception that it's just a high-profile, you know, the government officials that are right at the top of the crop that are practicing corruption. But we see that it comes even from the grassroots levels. We see corruption is rampant in Zimbabwe. What could be causing this?
Hello?
Mr. Mawere, I hope you can hear me.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, Mr. Mawere, can you hear me now? We might need to repatch that line. I think we have a very bad connection with Mr. Mawere. Yes, Mr. Mawere, you can.
Your narrative is very disturbing. You are saying there's rampant corruption, but corruption by nature is a private matter.
This is not my narrative, Mr. Mawere. We are relating to a report that has been done by...
This report is an invention of people who have their own end game. I don't think anyone sensible would say Transparency International is transparent.
Have you heard of the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission?
It's just another concoction day. They're not even paid. There's no money to pay them. The capacity of government to run its affairs is limited by the tax revenues that you get.
I believe we have Mr. Mawere back on the phone line. Mr. Mawere, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Right. We were speaking of corruption and the different levels that we see it. Yes. Yes, we're speaking of corruption and the different levels that we see it manifesting in Zimbabwe from grassroots levels. You know, you have a person who's driving out and maybe they have a broken light and they feel they have to pay a policeman who's on the road. We have government officials who are right at the top who also seem to be practicing corruption on that level. Is this a moral issue, or is there other underlying problems that we're seeing in Zimbabwe that are bringing about this practice?
I think what you have to trace the history of the major corruption scandals, starting from the Willowgate scandal, where people were investigated. It was established that they were involved in corruption and nothing was done to them. And that cultivated a culture of impunity. And everyone in any position, whether in government or outside it, would have a chance to embark on any corrupt activity. They have done so without any form of remorse and with a sense of impunity. But I would rather want us to talk about corruption at the highest level, because this is where the billions are coming from. This is where the millions are going missing. And even right now, we have heard that the Anti-Corruption Commission is investigating Minister Jonathan Moore on 9 counts of fraud, and one of which is embezzling of funds, alleged investment of funds belonging to Zimbabwe. So it is really a culture that is within Mugabe's government, that ministers, especially cabinet ministers, are left to embezzle state funds without any form of repercussion that goes with it. So it's the head of state who admits that 15 billion can just go missing as if it is 15 cents and nothing is done to anyone. We have yet even the bosses at Zimbabwe arrested, and the whole private and the whole vice president goes to the police camp to demand their release before they are even taken to court.
Mr. Maureen, I'll have to stop you there. Unfortunately, I have to manage my time as we seem to be running out of it. I want to hear from Mr. Mapetura. Do you think there's a lack of political will when it comes to trying to stem the issue of corruption?
No. The government is doing its best. I think.
Yes, you can.
I think the government is doing its best to fight corruption. We have seen this forensic report about Zimra. Mr. Gershom Passy was suspended, and other five managers, they were suspended. It shows the willpower by the government to try and stop corruption. And the issue of 15 billion, which Mr. Moore is talking about, it's okay, fine, it's the president who said it. But there was never a moment in time where there was about 15 billion somewhere in Zimbabwe, which was missed in corrupt tendencies. It's something that was researched upon, and a figure 15 billion came about. They were testing the dams in line with what the diamond mines were declaring. So the diamond mines were under invoicing and declaring very little.
But who was held accountable to that? I mean, who was responsible for that?
But Robert Mugabe cannot be accountable of what's happening in
I can understand
company.
that he cannot micromanage everything, but then so who should be held responsible? Who was held responsible for that?
The CEOs of the company and their board members.
We've never heard any report about that. Final remarks, Mr. Mawere. The mining industry in Zimbabwe especially seems to be in shambles. You having your history with SMM, Shabani Mines, why do you think we're failing to get meaningful revenues out of the country's minerals?
No, just look at Mawarire has got amnesia on SMM. Obed Gutu has got amnesia on SMM. But their memory is so sharp when it comes to Transparency International. They're not concerned about anything else except what gives them a political endgame. If we're looking at about corruption, Obed Gutu knows that Chinamasa is implicated directly in SMM, but he doesn't want to talk about it. He wants to talk about this imaginary reports that he is talking about. On air, there's a report. Where is this missing report, which can add up to 1 billion? 1 billion is a big number. Let's not marginalize 1 billion. 1 billion of anything is not a Zimbabwe dollar issue. This is US dollars we're talking about. So when you look at mining in a dysfunctional system where people, even the opposition parties, cannot even give you a coherent, I'm listening here, I'm confused. They are mathematicians, someone is this, someone writes reports, and these people want Zimbabwe to move forward. How do you reconcile the kind of messages we are getting with where Zimbabwe is today?
Right. Mr. Gucci, I hope you're still on the phone line with us. Your comments, Mr. Mapetere says this 15 billion that the whole nation seems to be crying about was not actual money that was in the country, but it came from some research that then realized that this is money that the country could have benefited from, so people shouldn't make an outcry out of it. What is your response to that?
I mean, quite honestly, with due respect, Mr. Mapetere, he knows himself that this came from President Mugabe's own mouth, where he actually said 15 billion worth of diamonds was lost. So we would like to believe that something that comes from the head of state. The head of state is the first citizen of Zimbabwe. He is the CEO of the government of Zimbabwe. And if he says that, we have every reason to believe him, unless there is evidence to the contrary. I actually, from my own investigations, think that 15 billion is an understatement. And back to my brother and comrade Mutuma, he knows the steps that I personally took to fight in his corner for the SMM holding. I held several meetings with Mutuma in Harare, in South Africa. He knows it. I prepared reports. I compiled reports. I did everything within my power as deputy minister. And for him to say that I'm not talking about his case, I believe, with due respect to Mtuma, he's not being entirely honest. I went out of my way. It was in the media in Zimbabwe. It was covered. The quarrels between me and Minister Chinamasa were on public record, reported by the mainline newspapers, by the Newsday, by the Daily News, even by the Herald. Everything is on record. What I did to unearth corruption and to expose it, and that includes the SMM holding saga. So for him to say we are just prepared to talk about corruption because we want political power, that's not it.
Mr. Gucci, thank you for that response. Again, we're running out of time. It appears everything is stopping with Minister Chinamasa. We'll try and get a hold of him so we can get his side of the story. His right of reply is very important to us as well. Closing remarks, Mr. Jilas Mawarire. Mr. Mawarire, I hope you're still with us. Yes, please go ahead. We were speaking of political will when it comes to stemming corruption in Zimbabwe, whether it's there or not, and where does the buck stop? I mean, does everything stop with President Robert Mugabe, or is there, the ministers who are responsible for these portfolios who should be held accountable when corruption seems to have been unearthed and evidence is there? We seem to have lost Mr. Mawarire there. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. We will have you back on the show. I know we have a lot of issues that we still need to discuss. Just a quick reminder to our viewers, Mr. Mtuma Mawere from SMM, he's a businessman. Mr. Molaif Mapetere is here in studio as well with us from Zanu-PF. Mr. Audit, spokesperson for MDC-T, was joining us on the phone line all the way from Harare, Zimbabwe, as well as Mr. Jilas Mawarire, spokesperson for Zimbabwe People First. Thank you so much to all my guests and for you at home for joining us in the conversation. Unfortunately, I couldn't read all your tweets. Hopefully, we'll be able to do that next time. For myself, Audrey Shimanda, have a good night.